Now, as we go through Europe, we want to provide some brief color, especially when you look at the cost of living and why that crisis is continuing to become an underlying problem, especially when you start considering, as we talked about in segment one, the cost of energy and the issues with Russia and how are they going to replicate that? Because if you're not buying from Russia, you can buy from somewhere else, but where? How are you going to buy that? Where are you going to buy that from? And I think that's a bigger problem in terms of how are you going to replace it, which is why I think Spain put out a cap on natural gas prices. But if you put a cap, then who's going to eat the difference? If the company's going to have to eat the difference, they just won't buy it and they'll just let natural gas go to zero, and I should say volume go to zero, and that becomes a underlying issue, which is why we see a lot of pressure on the consumer price inflation and why we see just the cost of living just getting out of control, which is going to just absolutely destroy the buying power of the European consumer. So then when you start looking at the soft data points going forward, so consumer confidence continues to get worse, major purchases, falling through a floor, and we don't see that adjusting. Growth expectations coming in firmly negative. Germany, IFO, firmly negative. So that's the soft data. But then when you look at the hard data, what's actually happening, what's actually moving? German retail sales, negative. New car registrations, negative. Germany factory orders, negative. Again, all of these things are just showing why we think we're already in a recession in Europe and how negative growth is going to continue to roll out. All the while, Eurozone core CPI was expected at 3.2%, came in at 3.5%. Eurozone service confidence came in fairly in line, but again, that's where we see some of the bigger pressures on the services front because the manufacturing has already started to soften. The central bank monitoring, when you look at just the euro area in general, this is where we see a lot of this slowdown in growth. You can see that the growth in general is already down and below zero, which is going to bring that financial side through. But we don't see the same type of slowdown in inflation driven by energy, driven by a lot of the underlying problems, which is why when you look at industrial production, we're coming in fairly at just above 50. But again, we think that we're going to be well below 50 on the industrial production side as we go through and showing that contraction. So manufacturing confidence is, again, leading from that to what we're talking about here. Eurozone manufacturing confidence fell from from the survey of 9.5, actual was 7.9. We see that getting worse as prices and disruptions, as we showed in segment one. The Eurozone, even though the US got better on supplier deliveries, the Eurozone actually got worse in that time period. And then if you look through the looking glass and where China is, the supplier delivery times are going to get worse again. So it's just going to hit twice, which is then when you look at the Eurozone consumer, the consumer continues to get concerned. Survey was for negative 20, came in at negative 22, and we see that going further down. And that's just going to lead to less spending, less consumption, and more pressure on the economy. Eurozone PMI prices charged surged to an all-time new high of 65.2. Given everything that we've seen in the system, that's not going to stop going up. And then when you look at advanced 5 months on the Eurozone composite PMI, as the ECB tries to do something to slow things down, they keep talking about how they're not going to raise rates, but the market is raising rates for them. So then they're going to be able to do that, and they're going to continue to, or at least try to shrink that M1, which again is going to pull down PMI even further. Real retail sales just turning negative and by negative, I mean against the trend. And we see that again rolling over more aggressively in April and in May, because this is showing March, but April and May, things got much worse. Things got more expensive. And that's where we see that deeper drop off, which is why when you start looking at German manufacturing production coming in at 92.2 and German construction PMI coming in at 46, as you get that big drop off once again, we don't see that getting back to positive, again, attributing it to more slowdown and that recession already setting in. All the while, Germany HICP was expected at 7.6%, came in at 7.8%. Spain came down a bit, but again, you're still seeing that elevated move, and those are things that are going to continue to be in place. All the while, Italian consumer confidence came in line, but well off of where it was, as manufacturing confidence slightly better, but as pressure continues to mount, that will fall further and put more pressure on underlying capacity, as the German national core CPI broke to new all-time highs, or at least going back to 2006 at 3.8%, which is well above expectations. And again, as Germany kind of sets the standard, we expect a lot of those countries to have the similar problems. Italy's unique because they can source from Europe. They also have a very wide coastline, so they have the ability to also go into the international market, which has helped them to offset some of their pressure. But again, it's not going to, it can't offset all of it. It just makes it one of the, I guess, the best of the worst, if you will. French consumer confidence came in at 88. You can see that they are well below where things were even during the lockdowns. They're coming in at some of the lowest ever, and the German consumer is no better, with the survey at negative 16 coming in an actual of negative 26.5. Consumer confidence, income expectations, willingness to buy. It's not surprising to watch this all drop through a floor. And I know we're going through it quickly, but there's not much I can add. You know, we're seeing this is what a recession looks like. This is the start of something, and an increase in pain, which we've been talking about in general. French HICP expected at 5.1, came in at 5.4. PPI surging 26.5. Again, it's just the pain is just throughout the whole system. And that's why when you look at the consumer, when you look at businesses, we see this underlying drop in activity, which is showing up in French household consumption of goods, now firmly below a normal trend, coming negative. And this is just looking at goods in millions of euros. This isn't even adjusted for inflation. If you adjust it for inflation, it's even worse. Which is then when you look at why German manufacturing orders getting much worse. And then when you look at Eurozone services getting a bit better, but a lot of that was because prices blew out to a record. Delays in supplier delivery times blew out to a record. So yes, the number was positive, but a lot of the underlying pieces of that positive were actually negative for the Eurozone in general. Which is then when you look at Italy, the survey was for 6.5 on inflation, came in at 6.6%. Italy manufacturing PPI blowing out to brand new highs, similar to Spain, Germany, France, 46.5. And given everything that we've seen on pricing, it may stop going up for a time, but it's also not getting much better to the downside, especially when you look at April. May, we should get a little bit of a softness, but again, softness is what? I mean, we're so far off normal that even a little bit of a pullback is still something that is going to be a bigger issue. And the reason why is when you look at Germany, import prices continue to move at a parabolic pace, and this is only in March. Supplier delivery times were getting longer in April, and they're going to continue to get worse based on the Chinese lockdowns and how reliant Germany is on China and that expansion. Household consumption, as you look at just where things are going forward, here's where you see a lot of that negative contribution and where the pressure is going to be going forward. Then when you look at PM survey index continuing to move negative, which is why when you look at GDP quarter over quarter, again, all things point to more slowdowns and more of that recessionary movements, which is when you look at German expectation of economic growth. Expectation was for 43.5, came in at negative 34.3, slightly better. But again, this was when you look at May, some things had gotten a bit better on cost, but as supplier deliveries, as we've been talking about with China, get worse, this will also be a fallout. And then Italy manufacturing output is now negative, and industrial production year over year, just going to show how things are going to continue to drift lower. With even though Italy has kind of been the bright spot in some of these, even that is going to see some slowdown. Now, it's going to be slight. It's just going to be maybe a small contraction, small benefit, but it's not going to be enough to offset the consumer, the slowdowns in Germany, the slowdowns in France, the slowdowns in Spain, and other parts of the EU. So again, there's a lot of reasons why we continue to expect pressure on the European economy, and realistically, they're already being in a recession for Q2. So that's what we have for you on Europe. In the next segment, we're going to go deeper into Asia and really kick off with India, just to bring things to light now that we have a lot of their inflation data.